Season 2 Chapter 6. Previously on A New Legacy. Secrets revealed. So the reason none of you remember your niece is because she jumped into Malivore to stop it from rising, I said, staring down at the glass in my hand and back up to the Michelsons, and the reason I was looking for Cole is because he was the vampire that helped create it in the first place. Third Pav. Bloody hell, Cole, when did you have time to do this? Asked Rebecca angrily. She waited for her brother to answer. He stared at her, rolling his eyes before he stood up and poured himself a drink. You mean between father chasing us for sport and Niklas having a fetish for sticking me into coffins? He asked sarcastically. I made some time, he said without any real venom. He finished his drink. Oh please, you know why you were stuck into a coffin? Because you kept drawing attention to us when you knew our vampire hunting father was on our trail and you loved leaving dead bodies in your wake, she answered with as much snark as she could. Freya sat between her siblings as she realized the gravity of the situation. They forgot the hybrid's daughter. She was erased like she never looked to the young blonde boy's expression. His expression was dark and his jaw clenched as her two youngest brother and sister went at rubbed the bridge of her nose and exhaled. Enough, Cole. Rebecca, you both are more than 1,000 years. Act like it, she said strongly, staring between the two. Cole narrowed his eyes at Rebecca and nodded his head shortly. Despite his snark, he knew the situation was serious, and unlike the rest of them, he knew why Malivore was created in the first place. Naruto, you said Malivore was created and my youngest brother helped. That means there were others, yes? Yeah, a witch and a werewolf. I'm assuming both of them are dead, and Cole was the only lead I could find when I raided and interrogated the organization that supposedly watched over Malivore for centuries since its creation. He paused before tapping his glass in question whether he could pour himself another. Freya understood and nodded at the unasked question. He poured himself a drink and kept speaking. The Triad, like they are named, set out to eradicate threats that could possibly endanger the human race. However, recently they've decided that the supernatural community became too big and wanted to raise Malivore once more to annihilate said population. He paused, taking his seat once more and sipping on his drink. Starting with the Salvatore school, the memory you saw where Hope was in a transitioning cellar, that was the day they decided to get more hands-on and infiltrated the school. It goes without saying that certain events lead to Alaric and myself being away from campus. However, once I returned, I killed them all, I finished strongly. Cole watched the blonde as he spoke. He listened to what he said about the Triad. He himself knew they probably decided to take things into their own. By the time Malivore was done, Niklas had found him and stuck him into a coffin for another 100 or so. Decided to ask his own questions. He needed to know who this guy was and what he was. What are you? He asked from his seat. He watched the boy's expression remain blank. Naruto merely sighed and decided to be honest. I'm not from this dimension originally, he answered shortly. As to what I am, I'm a fox demon, and no, I'm not kidding, he said seriously. Wait, another dimension? Asked Rebecca, confused. She didn't think about there being different worlds. I see, perhaps that's the reason you remember Hope, said Freya, realizing why she couldn't pick up any magic but felt a different kind of energy from the young blonde. This place you're from, is it called the Elemental Nations perhaps? Asked Cole, leaning forward from his position on the couch. Naruto's gaze snapped up to meet his, narrowed his eyes. How do you know that name? He asked quickly. The man I spoke to was from there, and I'll tell you this, the reason Malivore was created wasn't to deal with fairies and unicorns. He thought of the kind of thing they locked away. It was dangerous if let Malivore rose and that thing came out of its cage. It would spell disaster for both the humans and supernatural. What do you mean? And what does that have to do with my home world? Naruto's glass nearly cracked under the pressure of his hand tightening around the object. Cole sighed and his mind wandered back to centuries ago when he first met the red-haired man. Perhaps a coincidence or even fate, not that he was one to believe in such trivial things, but even so he had to admit it seemed like fate. I was traipsing around the world when I ran into him. He was on a ship trying to find something. For some reason I didn't want to drain him. We got to talking and I figured he wasn't from here. He said his home was the Elemental Nations, but he had a job to do. Being the curious man I was, I asked what it was. He then told me his name, Kazuma Uzumaki. He paused when he heard a glass drop to the floor. He followed the object to the person who dropped it. The blonde now stared at Cole, wide eyes. You said Uzumaki? He asked to clarify. Yes. Are you going to interrupt me again? He asked, somewhat irritated. No, but Uzumaki is my surname, and in my world, being or having that surname means that it was possibly someone from my clan. He reasoned. Perhaps, he did give me a scroll thing to hold onto, but no matter how I tried I could never open that damn thing. Rebecca and Freya sighed inwardly. Brother, continue please, said Freya, and she listened to the story. Ah yes, so he told me of his homeland. I was intrigued. They didn't use magic, instead they were born with something called chakra and would allow them to do certain techniques. Anyway, we became friends and he told me why he was here. He was in search of a strong witch, vampire and werewolf, since he found out about the supernatural creatures in this world, to lock something away, something that if given the chance to roam free would ruin the balance of nature and destroy life. He paused and fought a shiver when he remembered what Kazuma told him of the demon and how he continued to get strong. So then I offered to help, and besides I've always been interested in helping witches create amazing spells. Sadly, once I was done and the creature was transferred into Malivore, Kazuma died and asked that I ensure said creature is never released. I couldn't really make good on my word since Niklas had found me 2 weeks later and put a dagger in me, he finished off. You don't know what this thing is or what it does? Cole shook his head. Like I said, he gave me scroll but died before he could explain what the scroll says, he shrugged. Rebecca and Freya was digesting the information, but Naruto's mind was working fast as he listened to the original retell his story and encounter with his possible clansmen. Do you still have it, Cole? The scroll, that is. Cole looked to the blonde and nodded. Sure, it's in a crypt I keep in the cemetery with all the magical artifacts I've gathered over the centuries. Why? If I'm right, which I really hope I am, perhaps I need to channel chakra into the scroll. Besides, the Uzumaki from my world was known for the Fujitsu sealing arts, he explained for the benefit of the rest. Cole realized he was right. Since they were from the same world, he might have a better chance of opening it. Sure, I'll get it, he said and vamped sped away to the cemetery. Naruto was deep in thought. He heard his name being called before he looked to Rebecca calling him. I'm sorry, what? He asks. I'm saying, how can you be a fox demon? You don't look very demony. She asked unsurely. He chuckled. Because that's the exact thing Hope told him. Sorry, Hope said the same thing. I'll show you my Hanyu form. He said and removed his jacket. He willed his Hanyu form to come out. Instead of 6'0", he was now 6'2". His eyes were magenta, the Rinnegan present, the 9 tails protruded from his tailbone and swung around loosely, his hair remained the same but there was fox ears on top of his head. Freya, you're seeing this right? I'm not going mad? She asked her sister. Yeah, I am, Becca, it's amazing. I thought other dimensions existed, though I never thought this would be possible. She said, fascinated by the chuckled and reverted back to himself. So yeah, when I say I'm a fox, I'm definitely serious, he said with amusement, as much as he could given the current situation. Wait, how did you get here? Asked Rebecca. I died. I was fighting a war. One did what was necessary to save my people and I died while taking the shithead with me. He smiled a bit. After that I was given a chance to embrace my heritage, so to speak, and then Kami sent me here and said that an evil was coming and whether I'd like to participate or enjoy heaven. He shrugged and picked up the broken glass on the floor. You chose to come here. Are you positively insane? You must be. Why not enjoy the afterlife? Simple. I am an idiot, but since I made my choice I've never regretted it, and then meeting Hope was really just an amazing bonus. He smiled and took his seat. I don't even know what to say, chuckled Rebecca unbelievably while Freya shook her head in disbelief. Whoosh. Naruto looked up at Cole throwing him a scroll. It was old but it looked like it had a preservation seal on. Examined the rest of the seal. What's going on here? Cole asked his 2 sisters. Rebecca laughed softly. Nothing, brother, just questioning our young friend's sanity, she said vaguely. Cole looked confused but shrugged it off and turned his attention to Naruto. It's a blood seal, he murmured to no one in particular. Blood seal. So all I had to do is put some blood on it? He questioned unbelievably. Naruto nodded and gave him the scroll to try it. Cole cut his finger and smeared it onto the seal, but nothing happened. I think you're wrong, mate, it's not working, he said, handing back the scroll. Naruto decided to take a chance. Maybe. He bit his own thumb and dragged it across the seal. He heard a clicking sound as the seal opened. I suppose it's really is your clansman then, he said as he looked at the knotted without looking at read the scroll. It was in kanji. To whoever is reading this, I'm sure by now you've realized that only a member of the main Uzumaki clan can on this scroll. This scroll has all the remaining treasures and forbidden jutsus from the Uzumaki clan. Our clan in Uzushiogakure was destroyed in the Third Ninja War. Our home was the prison to a foul demon that roamed the elemental nations before. Only the clan heads were aware of this beast as it was dangerous and was sealed away. Since the war occurred, my father thought that the seals would degrade over time, thus the demon would be set a last-ditch effort, and with my sister Kushina already in Konoha, he sealed the demon in me and teleported me by using a forbidden jutsu to this world. I have been lucky enough to find people with the power to create a new prison for the demon. However, once I completed the transfer, my body will die and life force drained. This beast cannot be held by a human being nor a supernatural creature. The only reason I could hold out so long was because I am an Uzumaki and we are blessed with amazing vitality. So if you're reading this, it means that the demon might be unleashed. I apologize for putting this burden on you, and I hope you succeed in making sure the world does not fall prey to its influence. Sincerely, Uzukage Kazuma Uzumaki. Naruto inhaled a deep breath and exhaled sadly. This was my mother's brother, but from the time this happened and the third war in my home world doesn't make sense unless there's a distortion between our two dimensions. He spoke out loud. Perhaps you're right, I mean, considering that he teleported here somehow, shrugged Cole. Yeah, they used a forbidden jutsu to bring him here, but I don't think they were intending it to be this place exactly, but like he said in the letter, he got lucky. He paused, rolling up the letter and resealing it. Mind if I keep this? My clan's techniques are in here and they aren't any use to you guys since you don't use chakra. Cole waved off. It's your uncle anyways, but at least now I know why he died since it was so sudden. Thanks, Itmaya. He was cut off by the ringer on his phone. Sorry, he said to the Michelsons before he answered the phone. Rick, what's up? Hey, I just wanted to know how your search was going and whether you found what you needed. Yeah, and I might be headed back soon. Any new monsters I need to know about? I ax. I wouldn't say monster, but I think you might want to get a look for yourself, he said vaguely. All right, I'll be back in a couple of hours. He ended the call with Alaric and turned back to the Michelsons. Thank you for everything, Cole, Rebecca and Freya. I appreciate it, but I've got to get back to Mystic Falls. What about our niece? Asked Rebecca as she stood up. I'm not sure, but Freya, isn't there a spell you could use to remember her? Or something? He asked, looking between the three originals. Freya nodded. I suppose Davina and I can work on it, but I want you to keep in touch if you find out anything new, especially since this seems way bigger than just your school. He nodded. You're right, I might call in some help, but before that I need to get some more information on this creature. I said seriously. They shared the contact information. Later, Cole, try not to get daggered by your sisters, he said and walked out of the home, while Cole cursed at him. Bloody fox. He shook his head and went up to his room, leaving Rebecca and Freya in the room alone. What do you think he meant by help? Asked Rebecca. I don't know, but I'm sure it's someone strong and would be more help in this situation. This affects the entire world, Becca, she replied seriously as she walked up the stairs to her room to try and write up a spell that could make them remember Niklas's daughter. I'm sure you'd dagger us all for even forgetting her in the first place, wouldn't you, Niklas, thought Freya to herself. Season 2 Chapter 7. Previously on A New Legacy. Secrets revealed. It's better if you see for yourself. I'll be there in a couple of hours. I'm sure you'd dagger us all for even forgetting her in the first place, wouldn't you, Niklas? Naruto Pav. I drove about 10 hours straight. Well, my clone did, and I got some rest in the passenger seat. I'm convinced they're getting minds of their own, considering the death glares I get where I create them to do a menial task. When I arrived back in Mystic Falls, it was about 8 a.m. the following morning. I pulled up to the school wondering what would be so urgent that Alaric needed me back so quickly. There was only a week left of summer vacation and the students were coming back from their vacation. Some parents dropped their kids off. I spied a few cars and saw Caleb exit with MG. Which reminded me I should talk to MG about how I killed his mother. I could imagine how that conversation was going to go. I couldn't very well go up to him and say, Hey MG, listen, I killed your mom, but she was a raging bitch, she deserved it. I scoffed at my thoughts, sure that was going to go over real well with the vampire, I thought with sarcasm. I parked my car in the garage and grabbed my duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder and greeted some of the students with a wave of my surprised me that some parents sent the kids back after the break. Well, maybe that's because they didn't tell their parents of the monsters attacking the school. I gave MG and Caleb a small salute. MG, I'd like to talk to you once I check in with Dr. S. Meet me at the deck in an hour. I said to the boy. He looked confused but nodded. Sure thing, Cap. I chuckled at the name and continued my journey to Alaric's office. I heard two voices, one sounded like Josie and the other latter of the two sounded frustrated. I knocked and stuck my head through the door as Rick motioned me to come in. We'll talk about this later, Josie, please don't look more into it. It's dangerous, all right, he said pleadingly. The girl gave him a short nod. I promise, Dad, she said. I felt her emotions. She was lying. I looked at her as she passed. She gave me a smile and a hug. Whatever you're planning, don't do it, Gisette, I whispered near her ear. I saw her eyes widen before she nodded quickly and left the office. I heard the door close and looked to Rick. He was rubbing his temples. You look more stressed than usual. What happened? I asked as I sat on the sofa as I heard the man heave a sigh filled with look to me tiredly. Another pit opened, he said shortly. My eyes widened. Where? My tone changed immediately, and I felt the tension in my shoulders as I forced myself to relax. In an old tomb, crypt where nearly a century ago vampires were imprisoned in. He paused when he saw the confusion on my face. The tomb was used by the town's council when vampires had become a bit of a problem, so the council employed a Bennett witch to set a boundary spell around it so that the vampires inside would be desiccated and never bother the townsfolk again. But over everything that happened a couple of years ago, the vampires were set loose and a lot of shit happened. I watched him now in story mode as he explained about the Petrova doppelganger being imprisoned there. So Katerina tricked Stefan Salvatore, and well, let's just say many things happened back then, but anyway, the tomb was empty and now there's a pit in the middle of it, he finished. I understood the story, and Mystic Falls sure had a messed up history with vampires and witches, and it seemed like this Elena was in the middle of everything. Okay, thanks for the history lesson, Rick. I gave the man a small smile. But how did we discover this new pit? I'm sure not many students or people could walk in a place that has a barrier spell around it. I watched his head hit the table with a soft thud as he murmured, who found it and undid the spell. What was that? I asked. The man sighed and repeated his sentence. I said, Lizzie, my daughter found it, but she swears there wasn't any spell around it. My eyes furrowed. What would Lizzie being that far away from the school? She usually just goes to the square or the mall. Apparently she got turned around and lost when she was on a walk to get away from the disgusting image of watching her sister and Hobbit kiss her. Words, not mine, he said, repressing a shudder at probably thinking about his daughter in a compromising position with the Hobbit. I couldn't help the laugh that came from my mouth when I saw Rick's face contort into an disgusting expression. I'm sorry, Rick. I apologized before I sighed and leaned my head on the back of the sofa. But how are these things formed? Is it just a natural occurrence? Or is there a trigger? I questioned with my eyes closed. I'm not sure, but I do want some witches to try and put a barrier spell around the crypt. Whatever or however it's created, we need to make sure it stays contained, he said seriously. I nodded and decided to share the information I found when I was in New Orleans. I explained everything to Rick about what Cole told me and what I read in the letter, but I told him I wasn't able to unseal the scroll yet since he called and said I needed to get back here. So Malivore was never supposed to create it for the monsters we faced so far. I shook my head. No, it seems like whatever is in Malivore needs to stay there, but if Malivore is freed, whatever this demon is might be released with him. I inhaled a breath and looked at Alaric, and then Malivore will be the least of our problems, Alaric. It's just one thing after the other, but hopefully we stop Malivore before he has the opportunity to be raised, he said somewhat optimistically. It's great to be optimistic, Rick. I've got no problem with that, but we need to plan for the worst case scenario. By the look on Rick's face, he agreed with me. That's great, but we have no idea how these pits are forming, what the trigger is, and why there hasn't been any monsters yet. I nodded at the man and understood the frustration in his voice. We didn't have many new Malivore needed the 3 keys to rise and land and activated them, but the Hope took a dive into the pit and closed it. Now there was another one. Was it a natural occurrence, and why in those specific spots? Is there anything we can use to find out whether this thing is a natural occurrence or whether it contains magical properties? I asked, rubbing my chin. Snapped his fingers and stood to his feet and ran over to the books he had and looked through them. I watched the man curiously for a couple of minutes before I decided to ask what he was looking for. Bro, not that I don't appreciate the exuberance you're showcasing right now, I said. The man scoffed but ignored it and continued, but mind telling me what you're looking for? Yeah, I read something when I did my thesis in university about something called the Lazarus Pit. It would form naturally and have healing properties. They formed all over the world, or so it was said. He recited from memory. I nodded along, though I didn't understand what that had to do with our current situation. Okay, and for those of us that didn't find pits interesting, what does that have to do with our situation? Absolutely nothing, he said excitedly. I narrowed my eyes and sighed. Rick, if it has nothing to do with our pit, why are you telling me this? Because if it isn't formed naturally or from nature itself, someone must be creating it, or at least have the ability to create it, so it's magic. I breathed out. He nodded and handed me the book where it explained Lazarus Pit's properties and how it's formed. But who? He asked, now sitting on the desk. The only thing I can think of is the necromancer. I paused and gained his attention. Listen to me here, he's the only monster we haven't killed or sent back to Malivore because Hope let him get away. So what if he created another pit? That means black magic, and there are only 2 witches I know of who would be able to find the magical properties of said spell. He groaned. I have to call Bonnie Bennett. All right, you do that and I will go speak to MG about his mother, I said as I got up from the sofa, and when or if she agrees to do this, let me know and I'll accompany you to the new pit. I told the man before opening the door. Good luck with that, it's going to be a tough conversation. I nodded and sighed inwardly, muttering beneath my breath, don't I know it? The lake. I stood on the deck watching the sun rise higher into the sky. The water of the lake was blue and green mixed together. The water was still barely any ripples. It seemed was one of the places where Hope and I spent most of our time. We talked, laughed and sparred here, and now I was going to deliver some very bad news to a student who didn't deserve it, but standing here provided me with some peace. I felt someone watching me, but when I turned I didn't see anything. Shrugging off the feeling, I heard and smelled MG approaching me. He stood at my side. There was a bit of silence before he broke it and spoke. Naruto, what's up? I don't think you just called me here to enjoy the view. He asks. I sighed, turned to face him and nodded. My face remained blank. I wouldn't show any emotion when I delivered the news because I'm sure he would hate me regardless. You're right, Milton Greasley. His eyes widened slightly. First name and last. Yikes, this sounds serious. He chuckled but stopped when he didn't see my expression change. I looked him dead in the eye as I spoke. Milton, a couple of days ago I had to do something for the safety of the school. As you know, the Triad, the organization that infiltrated and attacked the school before summer, was the organization in charge of Malivore. We didn't know much about them, so when everything was done with, I went to their bases that we knew of and interrogated their people. I paused, letting the information sink in. I watched the boy nod. This led me to a place in Houston, Pasadena. They had a warehouse facility and the person who ordered the attack on the school was there. Okay, I get their bad news and all, Capitan, but why are you explaining this to me? Wouldn't it be better with the whole super squad present? He asked, confused, his eyebrows furrowed. Because when I got there, the person who ordered the attack was your mother, Veronica Greasley. Before he could interrupt, I continued. She and the Triad were trying to raise Malivore to rid Earth of supernatural creatures. But that mean? I cut him off. I saw his expression change. His eyes were filling up with tears and his fist clenched at his sides. That's right, Milton. Even though you were her son, she wanted to get rid of all of the supernatural creatures. I interrogated her, and once the information was given to me under duress, I ended her life. I finished. I heard the boy take on a sharp breath. His face changed slowly, the black veins spread underneath his brown skin, her eyes dilated and became completely black. You killed my mom, he said loudly and angrily. I gave him a short nod with an answered in an indifferent tone. Yes, I did. My hands were clasped behind my back as I watched the vampire battle with himself. I felt a punch to my face, applying chakra to my feet and held my ground as he launched his violent assault. You killed her and you act like it was nothing. A growl sounded from his chest. I said nothing and took his punches. He screamed at me, fight back. I didn't, my mouth filled with blood. I could feel my jaw fracture underneath the weight of his punches. He hit my midsection. I coughed a bit and spat. The blood from my punches started to weaken. I sighed inwardly. My wounds were already healing, but there would still be a bruise of 2 for a couple of hours. I grabbed both his hands and held them in my grip. His head fell forward against my chest. Why don't you fight back? He asked through the tears streaming from his face. Don't you regret it? I felt him slump in my arms. I had taught him to accept his vampire side, embrace it. That way he could keep his control instead of becoming a ripper. Because you deserve to hit me, MG. I'm sorry, but I don't regret what I did. It was for your safety, the twins and the entire school, so if I had to do it again I would. His cries got softer and I hugged the vampire. The only thing I do regret is the pain it brings you, and for that I'm truly sorry, I said, now looking in his eyes. He wiped his face from the tears. We sat in silence for a while. What was she going to do? Since Malivore was closed? He asked hesitantly. She had information about all the students and the first to be eliminated was Alaric and the twins, I said honestly as I looked over the lake. How did it happen? Did. He looked away. I waited patiently for him to finish. Did she suffer? No, I did it quick. She barely felt any pain. The boy's shoulders dropped and nodded. I'm sorry about your face. I waved him off. Don't worry about it. Did you feel like this when your parents died? I want to be angry and hate her for what she nearly did, but I mean, she was my mom and I don't know how to feel. He explained. I understood what he was feeling. After all, Kurama technically killed my parents, yet I never hated him. Instead, I loved him and still do. My parents died when I was a baby. I grew up as an orphan, so I didn't know what a parent's love felt like till I was 6 and a fox took me in. I paused, remembering Kurama and how he treated me. But MG, your mother was a bar person. But she thought what she was doing was right in her own mind. However, the way she easily discarded you like you were nothing is not what a parent is. They should love you unconditionally despite your faults or flaws. I felt myself being watched again. I turned to the direction where I felt the stare coming from, but again there was nothing. MG tapped my shoulder and I turned my attention back to him and continued. Sorry, I've been feeling weird all day, I said quickly, but as I was saying, even the supposedly great evil Niklas Mikhailson sacrificed himself for his daughter, so your mom had no excuse for what she tried to do to you, I finished off. Klaus didn't have a child, he said confusedly. I chuckled. That's not the point I'm trying to make, MG, I chided him. He scratched his head. No, I get what you're saying, but I think I need a couple of days as I process everything, I nodded and agreed. Of course. And thank you for being honest with me. Others would have hidden it. I smiled and held out a fist to bump his. You're a friend, MG, and I want to be honest just like I would like you to be honest with me, I said honestly with a shrug. He bumped my fist and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said he was going back to the school to get some rest, and I said my goodbyes to him. I sat a bit at the lake, a bit more, before Alaric sent me a message. Well, I guess it's back to work, I said softly. I tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but if it was a monster, my guard was up and ready to retaliate if necessary. Third person POV. Later, the group consisting of Bonnie, Alaric and Naruto were walking to the crypt where Lizzie found another pit. Rick, I didn't expect us to be doing this ever again, said the Bennett witch. Naruto wasn't particularly paying attention to the conversation, he was watching their surroundings closely. They were surrounded by trees, so it would be easy for an enemy to attack them. Me neither, Bonnie. Me neither. Naruto chuckled at the mon's tone. I'm offended, Rick, though you enjoyed our little adventures, joked Naruto before the man pushed his shoulder and scoffed. Yeah, like dragons and dryads were so much fun, he said, voice thick with sarcasm. Bonnie laughed at the two men. It reminded her of Alaric and Damon, but without the menacing qualities the older Salvatore had. I'm going to make a couple of clones to fan out. I've been feeling like I've been being watched the entire day, said Naruto to Alaric, and he nodded. Good idea, he told the blonde. He didn't feel what the blonde felt, but he attributed that to his heightened senses and trusted Naruto to make sure they were safe. After about 10 minutes they arrived near the crypt, where the new pit was formed. Naruto took out his two kunai and stood ready as Alaric entered first, followed by Bonnie while he took the rear. The crypt was dark, the only sunlight that shone through was from the cracks in the cavern. "Looks cozy," quipped Naruto. The others chuckled dryly. "You say that now, but just imagine there were 100 very hungry vampires looking at you like lunch," said Bonnie. "Well, that would make it a tiny bit less cozy," he said with a small smile. Bonnie gave the blonde a look and shook her head with a smile on her face. "Well, this is definitely not cozy," said Alaric, gathering the attention of the witch, and blonde stared down at a pit of black mud. It looked similar to tar. He fought a shiver of stood next to him and looked down at the pit in the ground. It was definitely not there a couple of years ago. "Wow, I don't even need to test it to tell you that the magic that was used here was very dark magic," she said slowly. She knelt to the ground and whispered a spell underneath her breath. Naruto looked around the crypt, and around the pit he smelled blood, but mixed with something. Eyes flashed to the magenta Rinnegan, as he looked for any trail of the blood he smelled. "I'm getting a scent of fresh blood mixed with something else here, Rick," he told the man as he continued to look, and he saw little blood splatters on the floor. "You're right, Naruto. The magic that was used was sacrificial magic. My guess was to open this pit," she said as she stood up and looked to the two men. "But whoever did this sacrificial ritual had enough power to do this without detection," she said honestly. "What happened to the body?" asked Naruto as he listened to Bonnie's dark-skinned witch shrugged in answer. "Not sure, but either they killed whoever they used or threw him in Malivore from what Rick's told me about it," Naruto nodded. "But this wasn't a normal human sacrifice, right? No way. The magic they needed to perform this spell was a lot, and if this amount was used I would have picked it up, meaning they used a barrier or cloaking spell to not let people know what they were doing." She folded her arms across her chest. She didn't know of any witches in Mystic Falls that had such power without channeling from the ancestors or from a supernatural creature. "Do you think it could still be the necromancer, Naruto?" asked Alaric. Naruto looked pensive. "I don't know much about magic, but he couldn't die by normal means and barely felt when we tortured him. Secondly, he can summon the dead, meaning he can channel whatever supernatural from the other side. And thirdly, he could still be controlled by Malivore Rick." He stated the reasons he believed that this pit was created by him. He knew it was a leap, but they had no other leads, and even though he's been quiet and not raising the dead to attack the school. "I know, but this seems too easy. Why leave this place here for us to find? There's no spell stopping anyone from entering. What's the end game? Maybe he knows we don't know how to close the pit, Rick, and the one that closed outside of town was done by someone else," he said, trying to avoid bringing hope up. The man saw his expression and nodded. "Bonnie, can you cast a barrier spell?" She nodded and muttered the Latin words underneath her breath. She wasn't able to make the spell stronger without channeling the full moon, but it should hold and she would know when the barrier was broken. "It's not as strong, but it'll let me know if the barrier is broken, but none of you can enter, all right?" Both men nodded. Naruto snapped his gaze to where he felt the presence again. "Stay here, I'll be right back," he said, and disappeared in a shunshin. Naruto Pav. I shushined to where my clone dispelled. I looked around and tried to sense a signature. "Who are you?" I said loudly, looking around. There was no answer. I listened carefully and heard the ground shift underneath the foot of whoever or whatever it was that had been watching me. "Trust me, if you don't show yourself now, I'll pull your spine through your mouth and make you wear it as a necklace," I said, full of venom. I didn't know why this creature was following me, but it was clear they were after something. I heard the noise again. I shunshined quickly to where I heard the noise and grabbed the creature and pushed them up. They were using some illusion because I couldn't see who it was or what it was. "Reveal yourself." I let my demonic voice come out. My eyes changed and my canines got sharper. I waited for whoever to drop their illusion or cloaking spell. My brain stuttered for a moment. My breath caught in my chest as I laid my eyes on those light blue eyes I loved so much. My mind paused as I waited for my thoughts to catch up. I breathed out her name unbelievably. Hope. Season 2 Chapter 8. Previously on A New Legacy. Secrets revealed. Well, that would make it a tiny bit less cozy. But this wasn't a normal human sacrifice, right? Trust me, if you don't show yourself now, I'll pull your spine through your mouth and make you wear it as a necklace. Hope. Naruto Pav. No. I shook my head as I stared at the auburn-haired girl before me. It couldn't possibly be jumped into that pit, and I haven't been able to find a way to bring her back. My mind flooded with every possible scenario, whether it was a monster disguised as hope to let my guard down, whether this was just an illusion, or whether I was simply going batshit crazy. The first one made sense. Since the new pit showed up, we were wondering whether a new monster spawned from it, so it had to be, but why take this form and watch me was the question. My hold slackened as I stared into the light blue eyes of my lover. Tears were building up and clouding her eyes as she whispered, "You remember how?" She chalked back a sob. My eyes narrowed. My features remained the same. I wouldn't fall prey to whatever in God's name was happening here. "You don't get to ask questions," I said sternly, trying to regain my composure. "Who or what are you, and why have you taken that form?" I watched carefully for any signs of deceit as I waited for the person to speak. "It's me, Hope Naru. I'm not some monster," she said sadly. I could hear the sadness in her tone. It couldn't be faked, and I felt her emotions. They were similar to a whirlpool. I focused on reading her energy pool, and I recognized the signature. It was Hope. My hope. A tear slid down my cheek. I pulled the shorter girl into a tight hug. Her small body pressed against my chest, and I put my face in her neck, inhaling her scent. The scent she smelled like the forest after a light drizzle. "I can't believe it. I missed you, princess," I breathed out as I held her. The tension I had in my shoulders had but all disappeared as I held her. I was never letting her go ever again. I would make sure to kill this Malivore or seal him up so that she never had to choose to keep those she loved safe. We stood in the forest surrounded by trees in silence. We didn't talk, and I simply enjoyed how easily her body fit mine. I missed her more than I. Silence for the first time since she left was welcoming and no longer felt empty. I pulled away, cupping her cheeks between my palms. I leaned down. My lips touched hers. Our lips fell into the uneasy rhythm like she hadn't disappeared for nearly 3 months. I trailed her bottom lip with my tongue, begging for permission. She opened her mouth up willingly as our tongues battled for dominance. I won the duel. I pushed her up against the tree. We were so lost in each other I didn't hear the footsteps approach us. I heard an awkward cough and a small laugh interrupt my makeout session with my lost princess. I wanted to be angry and curse at whoever it. Lips left Hope's reluctantly and turned to face the offender. Rick looked at me carefully. Hope next to me was trying to fix her clothes while fighting off a blush. Well, I didn't expect to see this." He left the question hanging. I looked to Hope and back to Rick before smirking a bit. You know, I saw a damsel and offered my services." I shrugged off with a smile till I felt a fist to my shoulder. "I'm not a damsel," she said irritatedly, playfully rolling my eyes at the comment. I turned back to Alaric with a serious expression now adorning my features. "Alaric, meet Hope Andrea Michelson," I said to the two. Bonnie tried to hide an involuntary flinch at the last name. I marked that against the fact the Michelsons and her didn't have a very flowery relationship. "You mean the Hope that jumped into Malivore? The Hope only you could remember?" he asked, making sure I gave him a short nod, while Hope looked down with the same expression I saw when she jumped into that pit. I would address it later, but for now I focused on answering Alaric. "The very one." "Wait, how?" He was just as curious as I was, and I couldn't blame him. I saw some suspicion in his eyes as well. "That's exactly what I want to know," I said, now looking at Hope with a brow raised. "I'll explain everything, but do you mind if I get a shower first? I've been in that pit a long time and need to wash this goo off me." I smiled and nodded and teased her a bit. I pinched my nose. I didn't want to say anything. I felt a slap against my chest, with a flustered tribrid on the other end. "I'm kidding." I held my hands up. "But I would like to continue this conversation at another venue." I looked to Alaric and Bonnie. "That's my cue. Well, it's been nice seeing you, Rick, even under the circumstances. Let me know if you need more help with this." Rick nodded and thanked the dark-skinned witch. "Thanks, Bonnie, I appreciate it, and I'll take you up on that offer, but hopefully we won't need it." I sighed inwardly. Even though he wanted to be optimistic, he had a hard time convincing himself. "Well, I enjoyed your company, Bonnie, and like Rick said, we'll take you up on that offer," I said with a smile. She nodded and went on her way to her car. Well, now since that's done, let's get going, I said to the rest. Rick nodded and Hope gave me a smile. I took her hand in mine and started walking to where we left the SUV. I was sitting in my room. Hope was in the shower. I looked around, it still was the same as I left it. I made sure to keep preservation seals on because I didn't want to come back to pictures were still lying face down on the dresser. I sighed softly. The bathroom door clicked and Hope exited looking fresher. Her wet hair was tied up and I was wearing some of the clothes she left her after our weekend sleepovers. You still have my clothes, she half stated and half acts. I gave her a small laugh. I was still a bit angry that she didn't discuss jumping into Malivore with me, but I decided to leave it be. She was back now and that's all that mattered. I do, yes. I paused when I felt the bed dip. Your room is still the same, I forced Rick, not let anyone use it. I took her hand in mine and interlocked our fingers. In case you came back. How did you know that I would come back? How did you remember in the first place? I didn't, but I kept hoping that you would. I pulled her up and exited the room. As to how I remembered. Your aunt and I think it's because I'm from a different dimension altogether. She stopped walking. You spoke to my aunt. Which one? Freya. I smiled in amusement. I met Cole and Rebecca too. I must say the Mikhailson genes are amazing. Your Aunt Rebecca would make any man very happy, I said with a small smile. I felt another punch to my arm. It didn't hurt, but I missed teasing her. I missed every little thing about her. Please don't tell me you flirted with her. There was some anger and jealousy in that question. I continued our walk to Alaric's office as I spoke. Define flirting. She narrowed her eyes and scoffed. I'm kidding, princess. Besides, I'm completely in love with you that I couldn't even think of another, I said in a slight exaggerated tone. Was all she said. I sighed inwardly and squeezed her hand and kissed her cheek softly. I love you and only you. I love you too. I smiled and entered Alaric's office. I took a seat on the sofa. Hope sat next to me while Alaric sat at his desk. So Hope, mind telling us what happened? I watched and leaned back in my seat as Hope started to tell us what happened when she jumped into Malivore. When I first jumped in there, I took Ryan with me. That's Landon's brother. First I was floating in an empty void. I'm not too sure how long, but then it was just me and my thoughts. She paused. I squeezed her hand, smiled and continued. Then I met Ryan again. He taunted me a bit before he told me my sacrifice was meaningless because I wasn't a full tribrid. I have the blood of a vampire running through my veins, but I haven't gone through transition yet, so me being there was causing Malivore some discomfort and not stopping him from rising. What happened then? Because as far I can remember, the Hobbit's brother was the one who wanted to raise his muddy dad. I asked. Hope nodded slightly. She explained how she told him she didn't trust him and then thought about his offer, because he knew where the monster spawned from. As we were walking to the place, he said he never willingly wanted to raise his dad, and me bringing him with me into Malivore broke the connection he had with his father. After a while I started to ask more questions because some things didn't make sense. Malivore had all 3 keys and me being in there didn't stop him, so why didn't he rise? She stood up, pacing the office floor. Alaric was intrigued by the story while I sighed. I saw the nerves and tension in her shoulders. I figured it out after a while. Malivore needed a host body to roam Earth, and that's why Ryan brought Landon to the pit outside of town. She stopped and looked to me and Rick. I clenched my hand tightly as I started to realize what Hope was saying. So you're saying he created his children as a vessel? I asked, disgusted by the creature. I shook my head and I felt bad for the Hobbit. So Ryan wasn't enough then? Hope confirmed my thought. No, apparently he didn't have the proper genetic makeup and so he needed another heir. God, this guy is becoming more unlikable by the second. My eyes snapped up to Hope as I processed what she said. About transitioning, I stood to my feet and narrowed my eyes at the girl. Why didn't you come straight to the school when you came out of Malivore, Hope? I asked, trying to remain calm. She looked at me sadly and confirmed my suspicions. I wanted to see you one last time before I became a full tribrid and stopped Malivore for good. A growl built up in my chest. So you were going to just do the same thing again? Without telling me? Alaric looked between the two of us and tried to calm me down. Naruto, calm down. I cut him off. No, Rick, I will not calm down when Hope so clearly decided to jump back into that void of nothingness after she completed her transition. I turned to Hope. There were tears in her eyes, but her resolve didn't break. Instead, even through the tears, she looked like her mind was made up already. Isn't that right, Hope? You thought I wouldn't pick up that someone was watching me. You thought you could just finish what you started without letting me know. Your family, she went to answer, but I cut her off. And how were you going to find another pit? What if another one didn't come or wasn't created? Would you have just hid away for however long it took? My tone was hard, fearful, and sad. Yes, I was, and you weren't supposed to remember me. It would have made things easier. I scoffed unbelievably at the comment. Easier for who, Hope? Me or yourself? That was selfish and unfair. How could you not care enough to even tell me or talk to me? Alaric slipped out of his office a minute ago, leaving the two of us alone. I sadly shook my head and turned away from the tribrid. You can't expect me to be okay with this. I lost you once and it was hard enough. I paused, willing myself to control my emotions, and I'll be damned if I lose you again. I'll fight against God if I have to, but I will not be letting you sacrifice yourself for something that we don't even know will work. I said loudly. She refused to back down, and for the first time since I met her, I started to hate that stubborn streak of hers. It's not your choice. It's mine, and it's my life. She said, her eyes flashed gold, trying to assert her dominance. My own flashed to the magenta Rinnegan I possessed. So everyone who loves you can just go to hell. Because it's your choice. I didn't wait for her to answer. Then I'm afraid I can't let you make that choice. I finished sadly. The comment was softer and almost a whisper. Wah! Her eyes were wide when I flashed behind her and pressed down on the pressure point in her neck and felt her body go limp in my arms. She slumped in my arms. I laid her down on the sofa and kissed her forehead. I'm sorry, Hope, it might be selfish, but I can't let you sacrifice yourself again. I took my phone out and dialed a number. I walked over to the cabinet where Rick kept the alcohol and poured me a double of Irish whiskey. I sipped as I heard the phone ringing, followed by a voice. Hello, Naruto, said the voice of the other side of the phone. Hello, Freya, I said quietly. I was about to call you. We figured out the spell, and we were about to use it right now. I sighed in relief. Yeah, just in time too. I looked back to Hope's unconscious body on the sofa. Hope's back. The line went silent for a couple of seconds before I could hear some noise. When we're done, the family and I will be there by tomorrow morning. Keep her safe. Always, I responded before I ended the call. I drank the last of my drink and out the glass down softly, and stared at my tribrid princess. I heard the office door open and saw Rick stand at the door. You knocked her out. I sighed and looked to the man and gave him a short nod and poured to the man one as he stepped into the office. I did, I answered indifferently. She'll hate that you did that. She doesn't seem like the type to forgive easily, he said, concerned. I chuckled without any amusement and leaned against the bookshelves. She'd hate me even more when she realizes that her family will be here tomorrow. What, the Michelsons are coming here? Why didn't you say anything sooner? Asked Rick, a bit panicked. I laughed softly. Well, yeah, I'm telling you right now, aren't I? He sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Who will be coming? He asked tiredly. I turned away from the man and muttered. I'm sorry I didn't get your muttering, Naruto, he said, and narrowed his eyes at me. I sighed softly and repeated what I said. Cole, Rebecca, and Freya Michelson. I watched him flinch at Cole's name before he could speak. Rick, you really need to get over your dislike for that family. I understand that they caused you and some of the inhabitants of Mystic Falls some issues, but seriously, it's been years without a single incident from what I know, so why don't you concentrate all that rage at Malivore and the Necromancer? I asked with a small smile. He sighed and sat in his chair. You're right, but you know it's just not me who fears the Michelson name, right? I know. And they'll see them around town, he continued. I rolled my eyes. Will Damon be a problem? I asked seriously, and Alaric shook his head before he stopped and looked pensive. I'm not sure, but Cole did kind of kill his wife's brother. Jeremy. Isn't he alive though? Yeah, because of the resurrection ring. I sighed and nodded. Well, let them know that the Michelsons will be coming to town, and we have too much happening already. We don't need any more problems. Sure, but just for the record. He paused. I raised my brow questionably. This such a dick bro move. I laughed at the man and shook my head before picking up the unconscious tribrid. Your concerns are duly noted, bro, I said before vanishing in a shunshin back to my room and laid down Hope on the bed. Third person Pav. The next morning Naruto woke up. Hope was still unconscious. He put some chakra in his fingers to allow Hope sleep longer than just a couple of hours. He decided to get some breakfast, maybe soften the scolding he was going to get from Hope. He closed the door and went to the cafeteria and got some pancakes and orange juice. I hope she's not too angry, he said under his breath as he continued his journey back to the room. He received a message from Freya saying they were 10 minutes away from put the tray with the breakfast on the bedside table and woke Hope up. Hope felt groggy. She slept amazing, but then she remembered why she slept, or rather was knocked unconscious by her blonde boyfriend. She looked at her surroundings and saw him stand near the door. She sat up, narrowing her eyes immediately before she could speak. He pointed to the bedside table. I got you something to eat. You were asleep for most of yesterday well into the morning, he said quietly. He folded his arms across his chest as Naruto watched the girl look at the breakfast, then back to him. Just because you brought me breakfast does not mean you're forgiven, she said sternly and started eating her breakfast. Naruto nodded without a smile. I know. And you don't get you knock me out when we're having an argument, she said in between bites. Naruto now raised an eyebrow. We were having an argument. I thought you were simply arbitrarily deciding to end your life. Without knowing whether it would stop Malivore, he said. His voice was soft, but there was anger in his tone as he spoke. Don't do that, she said, pushing away the tray and stood up to her feet and pointed at him. Do what? Be concerned about my girlfriend? Or not be honest? He saw the look on Hope's face as it deflated. He sighed and shook his head sadly. He heard 3 pairs of footsteps coming to his room. The breakfast was to make sure you were feeling up to guests, he said and opened the door. What? Hope stopped mid-sentence when she saw her family in the doorway. Well, there's our darling niece, said Cole, and he stepped into the room. Rebecca and Freya ran over to the girl and hugged her tightly, whispering soft apologies for forgetting her and not coming sooner. How do you all remember me? Hope asked, looking between her aunts and uncle. Rebecca gave her a small smile and pointed to the blonde who was standing at the door. Your boyfriend came to New Orleans looking for Cole for some information, and well, he showed us his memories of you, and we had already been wondering who on earth was this girl who were in family photos and paintings. Once we understood why we couldn't remember you, Davina and Freya worked on a spell that would make us remember you, she said, explaining everything. I helped with the spell, Becca, said Cole. Yes, how could forget, dear brother, she rolled her eyes. So now that we explained how we remember, do you mind telling us what you were thinking jumping in that pit in the first place? Asked Freya as she looked at her young niece. She reminded Freya of Haley and Niklas like a perfect mixture. Naruto watched the family silently without saying anything. He noticed the look Hope shot him when her aunt asked her the question. I was thinking that it was the only way we could stop Malivore from rising and keeping the people I love safe, she said firmly, not bucking under the heat of her aunt's gaze. Cole barked a laugh. You really are Klaus's daughter, aren't you? Rebecca shook her head and agreed with Cole's comment. You can say that again, but Hope, it was reckless. Hope folded her arms across her chest. Is that why you told my family, Naruto? She looked to the blonde who was standing at the door. I believe when someone wants to make a choice that will affect everyone else in their life and their own badly, an intervention should be called, he said without blinking. I'm not a drug addict, this is unnecessary, she defended herself. Naruto sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. No, Hope, you're not a drug addict, but making a choice without all the information could be even more dangerous and, like Rebecca said, reckless. You don't get to say that when the reason you're here is because you sacrificed yourself for the good of everyone else. She tried to deflect. She saw her boyfriend sadly shake his head. You and I both know it wasn't the same, and I already knew what I did would work, so your point is moot, but I'll let you enjoy the get-together. I have to go make sure Jeremy doesn't try and shoot your uncle, he before taking a bottle of whiskey out of the drawer. Try and talk some sense into your niece, please. I swear she's even more stubborn since she came back, he said to the rest. He walked over and gave her a peck on her cheek. I love you, princess, he said and performed a shunshin and disappeared. The rest of the room stood and stared at the spot where the boy disappeared from. Well, I didn't know he could do that, said Cole with an impressed look on his face. Freya sighed and sat Hope on the bed. Why did you tell him that? About sacrificing himself? She asked curiously. Hope sighed and shook herself from her thoughts. It's not important now, but I do need to go through my transition so that I can stop Malivore, she said. Her aunts looked at her before turning away. Cole, however, sighed. Even if you do, we don't know whether you'll keep your witch powers if you're turned. The two older Michelsons gave him a death glare. Hey, I said. If I'm not okay with this any more than you guys are. Besides, I'm afraid Niklas might actually come back just to dagger me if I let his heir go through with this, he said to the two older Michelsons who were staring daggers at him. But Hope, the actual reason it won't work is because you're not a werewolf of the Shadow Pack. He paused, looking to the women on the room. How do you know that, Uncle Cole? Rebecca rolled her eyes. Because he was the vampire who participated in creating this Malivore thing in first place, she answered her niece's question. Now before you ask any more questions, my favorite niece. I'm your only niece, she quipped. He sighed and nodded. Indeed you are now. As I was saying, dear old Daddy Michael killed off many werewolves, and one of those packs included the Shadow Pack. Meaning, there is no way to stop him from being raised, she breathed out in realization. Exactly, that's why we made those keys so random. I didn't think it would have been so easily found, but I suppose after a century or two our muddy friends started getting smart, he said, and voicing out his own thoughts. So what do we do? She looked to her family with a grim expression. We face this as a family and fight like you're never alone, said Freya, squeezing her hand, gave her the signature Michelson smirk. Besides, you've got your own blonde prince ready to battle anyone for you, Rebecca added helpfully while Hope fought off a blush. Yeah, Becca's right, and I rarely agree with my temperamental sister, he chuckled. I approve as well, and I know your mom and dad would too. Well, maybe your dad would put him through the ringer first, but he seems like a good fit, said Freya. Hope laughed softly. I missed you guys so much and I'm glad you're here. How long will you be staying? Well, we were thinking of getting the house ready we have in Mystic Falls so that we would be nearby if anything happens, said Rebecca. What about the baby? And Keelan and Davina? My wife will be joining us. We always need a great witch, but I think it's best if Keelan stays with baby Nick in New Orleans, said Cole. Hope nodded. Just don't cause trouble with the locals, Uncle Cole, warned Hope. Cole gasped, mocking offense. I would never. He paused, adopting a thinking pose. But if Jeremy wants another go, who am I to deny him? He smirked. I'm sure Davina will have something to say about that. You've been rather tame since you married brother, quipped Rebecca. Hope watched her family banter with each other with a smile. She was happy they were here and rather disappointed that they weren't able to stop Malivore, but they would face whatever would come as a family. Always and forever. Season 2, Chapter 9. Previously on A New Legacy. Secrets revealed. And you don't get you knock me out when we're having an argument. You don't get to say that when the reason you're here is because you sacrificed yourself for the good of everyone else. Exactly, that's why we made those keys so random. I didn't think it would have been so easily found, but I suppose after a century or two our muddy friends started getting smart. Naruto Pav. Once I left my room, I went to see Rick. He gave me a look before he left the office and muttering that he would rather inform Damon and Elena in person that the Michelsons we in town visiting. I did not want to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. No thank you, sir. Since he decided to go into town, I made use of his office to figure what else in the scroll that was left with Cole. I was pretty sure it was just going to be some of the forbidden jutsu of the Uzumaki clan. It would make sense since I wasn't able to find any important jutsu, only the dragon summoning contract. Also, knowing more about this demon would be great, I thought with a sigh. Alright Oji-san, let's see what we've got, I said to myself and took out the letter. I poured some chakra into the seal and watched as 3 other scrolls popped out. I bit my finger and smeared some blood across the first seal. Click. Jigen Janpu no Jutsu. This jutsu was blessed and taught to the Uzumaki clan by Asura Otsutsuki, ancestor of both Uzumaki and Senju Jutsu, was gifted and only mastered by the first Uzukage. It requires large pools of chakra and could drain the life force of the user if the chakra pool is deemed insufficient. The chakra allows the user to teleport to a place they've never been, however they need to have a clear image of said place in mind. Wow, this looks awesome, but from the sounds of it the Uzukage reserves were probably a couple of taels worth, I said to myself as read the scroll. I kept it, never knew when it would be necessary. My eyes went over another scroll, it looked new, probably preservation seals I thought, and started to read it. Tengoku no Fuon. Tengoku no Fuon is a seal that was created to seal a demon. It was used by Asura Otsutsuki that had roamed the elemental nations after the tailed beasts were separated by his seal. Is almost impossible to break, however requires much concentration. Requirements. Master in seals. Large chakra reserves. Caution. Can only be used by the royal Uzumaki line, in other words close descendants of Asura Otsutsuki. I whistled softly. If I didn't meet the sage of the six paths I definitely would have been wondering whether or not to test this. I said to myself it was impressive. Thankfully I came from the royal Uzumaki line. Sadly my clan was gone. Maybe I should start rebuilding it with hope. I chuckled at my thoughts. I'm pretty sure I would get a very severe beating if I were to mention that to her right about now. These jutsus would have been worth a fortune if it was found by some other villages when the third ninja war happened. I sighed and eyed the third scroll. It looked like a storage seal. I poured myself a drink and poured some chakra into the seal, and watched something pop out. It was a white ankle-length coat with a high collar, seemed similar to the one I had back in the elemental nations. The edges were trimmed with purple. I picked it up and looked at the kanji down on the back. It read, Uzukage, finished with the Uzumaki swirl. It probably belonged to Kazuma. It felt light. I looked and felt the material. It was laced with triple-layered protection seals, so it was clear that Kazuma used this in battle too. Well, thanks Oji-san. It's definitely more intact than my one I came here with. Man, I really need to stop talking about myself. I heard the door open as I finished my sentence. Talking to yourself is the first sign of madness, or so I've heard from various therapists. I chuckled softly at the voice. Is that so? I asked lightly, turning to the blonde twin. Yup, I have it on good authority, especially with me and the voices in my head. You, my darling, are not crazy, I've told you this, I said seriously as I looked at the downcast look on her face. Something was clearly bothering her. What's wrong, Elizabeth? Usually I would hear you insulting my overgrown hair, I said, pointing to my head for emphasis. She looked at me and I sighed before gesturing her over to take a seat on the sofa. I sealed the scrolls back up that were on the desk and the jacket. So talk to me, what's bothering you? She didn't answer. I sighed inwardly. Is it still about the golem dating Josie? She gave a soft laugh and leaned her head on my shoulder. No, I'm working up quite the phone bill talking to my therapist about that particular can of worms, but I chuckled a bit at that part and stayed quiet as she tried to gather her thoughts. Is it a twin thing you're not supposed to tell me about but will because it could possibly be dangerous? Lizzie looked up at me with wide eyes. How did you know that? I smiled a bit before relaxing more into the sofa. Eli, you and Josie are loyal to each other, but sometimes you have to protect the one from the other. I paused before turning to face Lizzie. And since I got back, Josie hasn't come to see me, so I can only assume she's still obsessing about the curse and it's driving her insane. I finished softly, so tell me and I'll try my best make sure she doesn't get hurt. Okay, but if you say you heard this from me, I'll hurt you very badly. She narrowed her eyes, trying to make sure I take the threat seriously. I nodded. Okay, so there's this ascendant and apparently it's got someone locked inside that can tell us more about the curse, but Josie found out the ascendant can only be accessed by a Bennett witch and she seems quiet now since she realized she wasn't able to open it by herself, and our dad is being tight-lipped about everything. URG, it's so frustrating, like it feels like he doesn't trust us. I mean, me, I can understand I'm the reckless twin and you know the crazy one, but he's not even listening or talking about it to Joe. All he says is that the person in the ascendant can't help us. It honestly surprised me that she could say that all without taking a breath, but I could understand her worry, and Rick wasn't doing anyone any favors by keeping more secrets. I didn't know what was in this ascendant, but I was sure Rick had his reasons, but he was just pushing his daughters to find answers on their own and it could end being a disaster. What's this person's name that's in the ascendant, do you know? I asked curiously. Yeah, Kai something. I nodded. Alright, I'll look into it and try and keep your sister from doing anything reckless. Meanwhile, we have a lot of shit to deal with, she nodded. I know I was the one who found that creepy looking pit, remember? She asked in a duh tone. I remember, Eli, and you did a good job. Just imagine if you weren't grossed out by Josie and Landon, it never would have happened, I said in a joking tone. Ha, don't remind me of that. I need to bleach my eyes. I wanted to say something before she sighed dramatically. But I would get blind and I can't be blind and a bitch, it just doesn't work. I was amused at how quickly she changed gears. She was just now worried about her twin and now she was disgusted by her twin's boyfriend. This girl was special. I laughed. Yes, of course, blind and being a bitch just doesn't go well together, I mocked. She raised an eyebrow at my teasing. I know you're being sarcastic, but I'd like to inform you that no one likes a sarcastic ninja. She narrowed her eyes, smiling smugly, clearly happy with her retort. Hey, that trumps an emo ninja any day, so I'll be a sarcastic one. Thank you very much, I said proudly. I heard her gasp. You get emo ninja? I chuckled, thinking about Sasuke, even though I understood why he acted like that, but he was just too much. You do, but come on, it's nearly lunch and I am starving, I said as I stood from the sofa. You always are. Hey, I'm a growing boy, I need my protein. Growing? What are you, 14? I rolled my eyes and didn't respond as we left the office and went down to the cafeteria. If you grow any taller, Mount Everest might run out of climbers and people would start climbing you instead, she said. I laughed at the double entendre she clearly missed. Now you see, I could say something very perverted, but I see you as a little sister, so I'll refrain from such crude commentary. You should count yourself lucky, I said in a sagely tone. Oh God, you really could, and I'm very thankful that you didn't, best brother ever, she said in a slightly exaggerated tone. I'm seeing a carbon copy of a high school Caroline right now, said Rebecca from behind us. Lizzie jumped and hung onto my arm in fright. Now Rebecca, it's not nice scaring young girls. You should know better, being's more 1,000 years old and so, quipped Cole from beside her. I laughed and felt Lizzie relax as she looked between the two originals. Rebecca, Cole, I nodded toward them, and even though she might be more than 1,000 years old, she doesn't look a day over 18 inches, I said honestly. I felt a punch to my arm. Stop flirting with the original, she said to me before I could defend myself. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Jenna Saltzman and Caroline is actually my mom, she said proudly, holding her hand out to the blonde original. I rolled my eyes and looked around for Hal, but I didn't see her. You're lucky she isn't her mate, she might have just given you a brain aneurysm for flirting with her aunt, said Cole with a teasing tone. I was not flirting and simply being honest. Besides, I don't need to have her even more pissed at me right now, I said, shrugging slightly. I'm afraid she might just hit me where it really hurts, I said, grimacing at the image of Hope kicking me between the legs. Ooh yeah, good that she isn't here then. Where is she then? I asked curiously. Freya suggested we have the school remember her, so they're busy rewriting the spell. I nodded. Good idea, I'd rather not everyone ask me a million questions about the appearance of our tribrid princess, I said quietly. I watched Lizzie and Rebecca get on like a house on since Alaric told me there was a bit of a feud between Caroline and the blonde original. I motioned first Cole to follow me as the other two were immersed in their own conversation about the latest fashion. I didn't know and I didn't particularly care about the subject. Cole, do you know anyone by the name of Kai? I asked as we stood in the empty hallway. The dark-haired original looked like he was thinking. Rings a bell. Malachi, I think his name was. He became a hybrid of witch and vampire. I thought witches lost their powers if they turned, I asked confusingly. Normally that's the case, yes, but he was a siphoner, so he didn't have his own magic to begin with. But when he changed to a vampire, he could use magic by drawing on his vampirism, since becoming a vampire is technically magic as well. I nodded. The other two seemed to be finishing their conversation. Why the sudden interest in him? Asked Cole curiously. Apparently he knows information about the Gemini Coven, and well, I don't really think it's a good idea for the twins to open that can of worms if I don't know whether he can be trusted or not. The twins important to you? He asked somewhat suspiciously, probably because he knew I was with Hope. Yeah, I see them like little sisters really. I shrugged. He seemed happy with the answer. Naruto, why didn't you tell me you knew the Mikkelsen family? Asked Lizzie, affronted. I met them recently. Elizabeth, calm down, your fangirl is showing. I chuckled, considering your dad's not particularly fond of them. I thought you would share his thoughts. I said honestly because I really did think she would be opposed to it. No, come on, those things happened ages ago, way before my time. Besides, my dad's always had a bad tendency to carry grudges, she said nonchalantly. Cole barked out a laugh while I chuckled a bit. Yeah, I told him the same thing too. Let bygones be bygones, I smiled. Now I did say I was hungry and I could definitely eat. I said before the four of us went to the cafeteria. Making small talk and enjoying was funny. I enjoyed his humor and Rebecca was snarky and sassy and it suited her pretty well. Lunch went on like that until we all went our separate ways. Rebecca and Cole decided to get the house set up for their stay in Mystic Falls and Lizzie decided to keep an eye of Josie. After lunch I made my way to the deck to have a training session. I created a couple of clones and started sparring. I felt eyes on me and killed my last clone. You can come out, Hope, I said, looking toward the trees. It was nearly 5. I hadn't realized I'd been out here for such a long time. Hey you, she smiled softly and walked over to me. I put on my vest and unwrapped the tape around my hands. Hey, you calmed down yet? I asked, stuffing my training gear in my duffel bag. I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have brought up your past like that. I smiled, accepting the apology. It's okay, but I might punish you, I said, wiggling my eyebrows. You would? And what exactly would you do? Ooh, this wasn't new, but normally she would blush and call me a pervert. I stepped closer to her and leaned down, ghosting her neck with my lips, and moved up to her ear. Well, I could tie you up. I paused as I inhaled her scent. God, she smelled delicious. Or I could deny you my kisses, I teased, moving away from her neck up her jaw, ghosting her lips with mine. You wouldn't last either, babe. She tried sound confident, but it came out as a whisper instead. You say that? I trailed off, our lips we inches apart from each other. I didn't lean in any further and waited her to give in. I wrapped my arms around her waist. My fingers went underneath her t-shirt, touching her milky skin. You're even more beautiful than I remember, princess. Perfect, stubborn, brave and powerful. I whispered, my eyes never left hers as I spoke. After a second she gave in and closed the gap between us. The kiss was wild, a clash of teeth and tongue. I was already sweaty from training, but I picked Hope up and pushed her against a tree, her legs wrapped around my waist. She moaned in my mouth as we kissed. I moved my lips from her mouth into her neck, sucking on her pulse point, while grinding my groin into her. God, I've missed you so much, baby. I heard her pant. I slowed down my track on her neck and pulled slightly away. She whined when she felt me stopping. Why are you stopping? Because I don't want our reunion to happen against the trees where everyone could see us. She realized where we were and blushed. No matter how hot it would be, I teased. Is your family gone? I asked. She nodded and I kept holding her and grabbed my duffel bag. Hold on and close your eyes, I said before teleporting us to my room. Our clothes were off immediately. My lips traveled across her body, up her legs, inside her thighs, like I was mapping out my favorite travel destinations. I moved my lips down to where she needed me most, and she was dripping already. She moaned and whined for me to stop teasing. And I did. I dove into her pussy, sucking her clit hard and unforgiving. I felt her squirm and move her hips, but I kept them down with one hand and used the other, inserting 2 fingers between her folds. I lifted my face and watched her eyes clench tightly as I thrusted my fingers in and out of her. Yes, more, was what I heard, and goddamn was it music to my ears. Open your eyes, Hope. Tell me what you want, I said to her firmly. Her eyes went open and I saw her light blue eyes darken a shade, full of lust and passion. I want you to take me, she said. I smiled. Patience, princess, I will in due time. When I finished my sentence I picked the pace up and curled my fingers, hitting her G-spot. She moaned loudly when I did and begged for more. I felt her juices hit my fingers as she orgasmed. I watched her face contort in ecstasy. Simply gorgeous, princess. I smiled lightly, let her breath for a second before I lined myself up with her slit. I looked down into her eyes. Ready? She nodded and wrapped her arms around me. I held myself up on my elbows as I slid into her warm folds slowly. She hissed and I let her adjust before slamming into her roughly. I grunted in her neck, God, you feel so good wrapped around me, I murmured in her ear. She clawed at my back. I thrust it in and out of her. I moved up to sit on my knees and moved my hands towards her breasts and squeezed them. They bounced as I moved inside her. Her hair was fanned out on the pillow. God, I'm almost there. Yes. Yes, she said between breaths. I doubled my efforts and watched her back arch off the bed as she screamed my name loud enough for the school to hear. Well, thank Kami I put up silence jutsus in my room, otherwise we definitely would have had visitors. I continued to pound away at her as I felt my own climax build in the base of my dick. Hope looked worn out already, and I couldn't help but feel proud when she moaned and climaxed once more as I painted her insides white with my own climax. I pulled out of her slowly and took out some wipes from the bedside drawer to clean up her messy thighs and threw it into the trash. Well, I see you definitely missed me, I smirked smugly. Was all I heard from the tired girl. There was a satisfied smile on her face. I pulled the covers over her. Too tired for another round? I joked. Maybe later. Now I just want to lay in your arms, baby. I haven't felt them for so long. She managed to get out a sentence. I nodded and pulled her up to lay on my chest. Her bare breasts felt amazing against me. I gently ran my fingers through her hair as I heard her breath even out and she fell asleep. I wish this peace could last forever. I didn't know it then, but those were definitely not the best words to say. Season 2 Chapter 10. Previously on A New Legacy. Secrets revealed. Rings a bell. Malachi, I think his name was. He became a hybrid of witch and vampire. It's okay, but I might punish you. I wish this peace could last forever. Naruto Pav. The next morning, about 6 p.m. Usually I would be doing my morning training already, but since this was the first time for the past 3 months that Hope was back in my bed that I felt at peace, I decided to linger in it a bit longer. I ran my fingers through her hair absently whilst looking at the ceiling, thinking about the last few weeks. Meeting the Mikhailson family, destroying a part of Triad, another pit opening, and Hope coming back. You're thinking very loud, babe. I heard from the girl on my chest. Am I? I replied, I said absently. Yeah, you are mind telling me what's going on in that mind of yours. I sighed and kissed her head softly as she moved off my chest. The usual, monsters, and thinking that I need to get rid of that necromancer. I paused, also making sure the twins don't get into too much trouble considering they've been, or rather Josie has been, very obsessed with finding information about this curse, I said, sitting up against the headboard. That sounds about right, but aren't you usually training about now? I would, but I decided to spend some time in bed, my princess, before I go and face reality, I said with a heavy sigh. We can't hide away forever, she said softly, laying her head against my shoulder. We can try, I quipped. She shook her head and laughed softly. You wouldn't even if we could. You're a good guy, Naru. I raised an eyebrow at the comment. A good guy? Does that make you a bad girl? I teased lightly. Why do you have to make it perverted? She asked with a huff. I got out of the bed naked and shrugged before gathering some clothes and ran into the bathroom. You weren't complaining about my perverted nature last night, I joked and closed the door as she threw a pillow. So violent. I laughed and turned the shower on and stood underneath as the water sprayed my body. It felt amazing. I heard the bathroom door open, followed by the voice of my princess. Can I join you? You know, to save water and all. I smiled. Oh, of course, to save water and all that. Then sure, I wouldn't want there to be a crisis, I replied, playing along. She got inside with a giggle and stood in front of me and used the soap and lathered her body. My hands roamed her body, taking this as an opportunity to massage her breasts. You know, these might just be my favorite part of you, I whispered near her ear. Wow, really? I wouldn't have thought, she replied sarcastically. You might not want to be so sarcastic, princess. I've got you trapped in the shower with nowhere to go, I threatened playfully. She pushed herself against my front, grinding her ass into my dick. Maybe that's exactly what I want, she said, lowering her voice, and I think it's safe to say that the goal of saving water was not met, since the shower we took together seemed to have wasted more than saving it. Let's say if there was a water shortage in future, I would probably do the same thing again. I was getting my training gear ready and Hope was tying up her hair in a bun. She was still in her underwear. Are you going to join me for a spar? I think we sparred plenty in the shower, don't you think? She said with a bit of mischief in her eyes. I chuckled and grabbed my medical tape. Yet I constantly get labeled as a pervert. I rolled my eyes playfully and ducked, dodging the wet towel being thrown at me. You need to stop throwing things at me, woman, I said as I finished wrapping my hands. And will you be joining me, or do you have plans with your family? I do. Yes, my aunt wants to use the spell on the school, so she's going to channel my Aunt Becca and Uncle Cole while I help her. I nodded. Good idea, I said, grabbing my training bag and picked her lips softly. All right then, I'll be at the lake if you or Rick need me, okay? She nodded and said her byes. I left the room in a shunshin and started my stretches and created 5 clones. I took out a blindfold. I was going to try and use my senses only to defend myself. Okay guys, I want you to try and cloak your chakra so that I can't sense you. Instead, I'll rely on my hearing only. Sure, boss, my clones replied and cracked their knuckles. Like I said before, I'm sure they were getting consciousness of their own, and wanted to pay me back for all those menial tasks I let them take on. I sighed before taking off my t-shirt and put the blindfold on my eyes. I took a deep breath and got into my taijutsu stance. The fight was intense and I struggled. My clones were relentless. I heard more footsteps, however no one else participated. I got a nasty blow to the chest that sent me skidding across the lake for not paying attention. They must really be pissed at me, I muttered. I ran across the lake in a blur and killed their clones quickly by sending a rapid barrage of punches and kicks. The last one muttered Rasengan and I didn't want to take it head on. I created my own Rasengan and reinforced in with Yuki. It was a blue and red ball, smaller than the normal Rasengan, but definitely more dangerous. Rasengan. I clashed with my clone, pushing our Rasengans together, and I pushed through and killed him too. Well, that was an interesting attack. How about fighting against someone other than yourself? Asked a cocky voice, and I knew it was Cole. I smirked and took off my blindfold and looked toward the voice. You're implying my clones were going easy on me? Pointing at the bruises on my body for emphasis. He shrugged and gave me a lopsided smile, trying to bait me into fighting him. It would be a great training session too. Well, they are you. So. He left it hanging. I sighed and saw Hope and Rebecca watching. Hope gave me a smile and a thumbs chuckled at the scene. I shrugged and gestured for him to come on. Weapons? I asked. He shrugged. I went to pick up 2 bow staffs and threw one over to him. Ready when you are, Mikhailson. He chuckled and used his vamp speed. There was an entire 5 minutes of dodging and evading each other's strikes until the staffs broke. We threw it to the side and went at it hand to hand, executing a roundhouse kick that sent him into a tree, which consequently broke it. That must have stung, I commented. We're just getting started, mate, he said, flashing his vampire face at me. It was faster and I managed to keep up by using my senses. He punched my gut that probably fractured a rib. You feeling all right there? He taunted. I chuckled and spat some blood from my mouth and wiped my mouth. Bloody perfect, I said, amused at my unintentional pun. We battered each other for a few moments until I decided to pick it up a bit. It's been fun, Cole, I said, and activated my Rinnegan and held my palm out to him. But let's see you handle this. Shinra Tensei, I said softly, and watched as the gravity push propelled him back into the trees. What was da? I cut him off by flipping through signs quickly. K's no Yaba, was all I said, and watched Cole being attacked by 100 tiny wind blades. His rapid healing wasn't able to keep up with the speed of the blades. He sank down to a knee. I was about to finish him off when I looked to the woods and saw the trees wilting. I heard a hiss and prayed to every god that Orochimaru's snakes didn't follow me to this dimension, because that would be a kick in the ass. Cole, I'm afraid we have to continue this another time. We have company, I said, pointing to the trees. I helped the vampire to his feet as he looked to the woods. It was about 2 in the afternoon, but the weather wasn't too great. It was overcast. The sun was exactly playing ball either. What is it? Asked Hope as she came closer to Cole and I. I'm not sure, but I'm betting you that it's a snake, because I heard a hiss and, well, I've got some bad experiences with snakes, I said, grimacing at the memory of fighting the snake Sanin in the Forest of Death. How do you know it's a snake? And why would the trees would be wilting if it's just a snake? Asked Rebecca as she looked at me. I didn't take my eyes away from the woods and answered her question. I don't know, Rebecca admitted. I was cut off rudely by Cole. What the hell is that? He pointed to a nearly 50-foot snake, with green skin slithering out of the woods, killing off everything in a 5-foot radius. Could it be from Malivore? Asked Hope as she readied herself. Maybe. But we would have heard from Bonnie. She put a barrier around it, I said, and heard another pair of feet run towards us. It was Landon. Ah. He breathed heavily, his hands on his knees as he tried to catch his breath. What is it, Hobbit? We're kinda in the middle of something. He held up a finger indicating he needed a second. Dr. Saltzman said Bonnie called. Cole chuckled dryly. Let me guess, she told you the barrier was broken. He guessed sarcastically. Yeah, how did you know? He asked stupidly. I really didn't need to deal with this idiot right now. I simply pointed to the creature, who had its gaze away from us. I heard him breath in a sharp breath. Oh my god, that's a basilisk. He paused and went in nerd mode, explains some of the characteristics before finishing. I've seen this in Harry Potter but never thought it existed. You know, it kills the vegetation around it, and most importantly, now I don't know what exactly prompted the basilisk to look at the hobbit that time. Perhaps he heard his name being called, or maybe he found him just as irritating as I did, but when he did, Landon just fell limply to the ground. Is he dead? Asked Hope softly. He was a phoenix, so he would come back, and I wasn't worried too much about him but more about letting this creature get further into the school than it already was. I wondered how it got here unnoticed by people too, probably the fucking necromancer's doing. That guy was aching to be eradicated. He is, but I'm guessing the hobbit was leading up to don't stare at his eyes because it could kill you, I said, not looking at the creature. I remember it from the movie, but I wonder if we kill it the same way. I wondered out loud. I made 2 clones and sent them to distract the snake while I strategized with the 3 Michelsons. Cole gaze snapped to me as well as Relay and Hope. You watched Harry Potter? Asked Cole. I sighed and narrowed my eyes at him. What? It's a good movie. Besides, I was forced by Alaric for Bro Night, I said defensively. You have Bro Night? Asked Cole again. How can we kill him, Naru? Asked Hope at the same time as her uncle's question. I ignored Cole's question and answered Hope. Well, in Harry Potter they used a mirror. I paused. Do we have one big enough that will scare this bastard? I asked to the group. Hope shook her head. Well, where can we get one then? I asked, and Cole rolled his eyes. At the mirror store, he deadpanned. I didn't pick it up on his sarcasm immediately since I was trying to formulate my own plan. We have one of those. I looked to the guy and saw his smirk. Before I could retort, my clones were destroyed. Damn it, come on, we don't have time for this, Hope. I need to try and use a fire spell. I paused, took out a scroll and poured some chakra into it and 2 katanas and handed them to Rebecca and Cole. Will you be able to use it? I asked them and they nodded. Brilliant, I might just make you my bro too, Cole joked. I couldn't help but laugh at the vampire's timing. Come on. Don't look into its eyes, as Landon has so clearly demonstrated. I pointed to the dead body. You seem not to care about his death. Asked Rebecca before I could answer. Hope did. That's because he's a phoenix and pretty much will come back, and Naru doesn't like him because he kissed me. She smirked at the last bit. Okay, firstly, I'm offended that you think I'm jealous of the hobbit, and secondly, I pushed her out of the way from the snake who destroyed my clones and slithered towards us. I'm amazing, you're lucky to have me. I winked and went to attack the large snake, though it barely scratched the creature. This continued for another 10 minutes before Cole screamed frustratingly. It's not bloody working. Any other ideas, mate? I scoffed and blasted a tailed beast bomb into the side of the creature. A mirror, Cole. We need a fucking mirror. I said back, slightly winded since most of our attacks were useless, but the Yuki-infused attacks I blasted the basilisk with seemed to work. Well, we don't have one, so what else? I sighed and created 20 clones reinforced with Yuki in them to try and destroy him from the inside. All right, guys, I need you to be eaten by that snake, I said, pointing to the 50-foot snake. It looked irritated and angry. His eyes were a yellow from the memories I received from my now 2 dead clones. Why don't you get eaten? Said one of my clones with some attitude, but whining was heard from the rest. I scoffed incredulously. Firstly, I'm the original here, and secondly, I'm getting the feeling that we've had this exact same conversation before, I said with a pensive look. Because we have, chorused my clones, and I couldn't believe I was arguing with them. And from my memory it worked, so let's go. Victory stands on the back of sacrifice, guys, and your sacrifice will be celebrated, I said, pushing them along. They groaned but ran, eyes closed, straight into the creature's path. As it opened its large jaws, the teeth were sharp. I thought the basilisk would at least chew his meal, but instead practically inhaled them, though I wouldn't complain, I needed them while in his stomach anyway. What good will that do? Asked Cole, standing beside me now, who witnessed the entire conversation I had with my clones. From the corner of my eye he was rather amused too. Wait a second, I said, breathing in, and heard the last clone curse me as it was being swallowed. Bunchin Debakua, I muttered with a one sign. A split second my 20 clones exploded in the stomach of the monster. Cole and I were standing too close to the blast site and felt the basilisk blood spray against us, followed by guts. You know, usually I wouldn't mind swimming in the blood of my victims, but those were human, deadpanned Cole. I looked at him. We covered in blood from head to toe, and it wasn't a pretty sight at all. At least we got rid of that reptilian bastard, I said helpfully. Cole sighed and wiped his face a bit. He looked pissed off but happy that the snake was dealt with. I suppose you're right. By the way, where are the girls? I'll be very pissed off if Rebecca missed the blood rain. I looked to the side and saw the girls. They had splatters on their clothing, but nothing intense. Well, Cole, you've always been a messy eater, she told the brown-haired original, who rolled his eyes. Hardy ha, Becca, fantastic. You've missed the show then. I watched and saw Hope grimace while looking at me. What, Hope, do you not like my new look? She scoffed, and I came closer to her, wanting to hug her. I swear to God, if you come closer to me, Naru, I will cut you off, she said, not noticing that her uncle and aunt were no looking at her. Eyes slightly widened. She realized what she said and tried to backtrack, but decided to remain quiet and divert the questions to me. Relax, Freya might give you more grief than Cole and I will, but do I hope you're using condoms? At least I'm too young to be a great aunt, said Rebecca somewhat jokingly. I, on the other hand, chuckled awkwardly. What are those? I asked. Yeah, I knew what condoms was, but I didn't see the need to use it. Hope had an anti-pregnancy seal, so she wouldn't carry any little ones just yet. Both Hope and Rebecca shouted, "What?" while Cole saw the smirk on my face and laughed. Not that I'm not enjoying this, I said before pointing to Landon, but the hobbit will be coming back to life any minute. I saw Rebecca gasp at the sight of the boy bursting into flames before rising out of the ash a second later, looking confused. I swear everyone keeps interrupting me today, I muttered before turning to Landon. Hobbit, welcome back to the land of the living. Where's Rick? You guys know that there's blood all over you, right? He asked, looking between Cole and myself. Cole rolled his eyes while I replied rather sarcastically, because how in the world would a sane person not notice they're covered in blood? No, I actually haven't. I paused, adopting a thinking pose before looking to Cole. Have you, Cole? Noticed we're covered in blood, that is? Cole smirked and chuckled, though his smirk looked more like a menacing and murderous look considering our current appearance. Not the faintest clue, Hope interrupted us before we could continue. All right, enough, guys, she said, sending a glare to me and her uncle. I had a feeling Cole and I would get on pretty well. Now, Landon, where is Dr. Saltzman? And the twins, usually they'd be here, she asked. I realized now that everyone remembered Hope. They probably done the spell this morning, after I came for training. Well, Dr. Saltzman said he had something to take care of and Lizzie was with him, but he found me and told me to go find Naruto to tell him about the barrier being broken, and well, you know, probably from there, he said, referring to the large reptile we had to fight a couple of minutes ago. And where was Josie? I asked, looking to the curly-haired boy. His face dropped at the name. We kinda had a falling out this morning and I haven't seen her since, he muttered quietly. About what? I narrowed my eyes at the boy. His gaze turned to Hope and then back to me, but didn't answer, though I didn't need him to. All right, never mind, your longing gazes gave me a clue. Excuse me, I'm going to find my little sister, I said to the group and looked at Cole, muttering under my breath. Cole, later, I'd like to talk you later about something important. I saw the vampire's face change from the smirk to a curious look before he nodded slightly. I knew Rebecca might have heard me, but it involved her too, so it didn't matter much. Hope, can you stay with Landon? I don't want the necromancer or whoever it is that created that pit to get him. She nodded. All right, I'll see you later. Bye Rebecca, always a pleasure, and Cole, my future Brosidon. I paused and enjoyed the grimace on his face at the name. No, you will never call me that again. I laughed and pouted a bit, and here I thought we bonded, I said, mocking offense. Maybe, but we're definitely not doing pet names, he said with disgust. You'll come to love them, I said before I disappeared in a lightning shunshin to Alarics office. I appeared and both occupants looked frustrated and in the midst of a rather intense argument. I looked to the blonde twin and back to Alaric and saw the serious look on Alaric's face and the distraught look on Lizzie's face. What happened and what did I interrupt? They both looked at my appearance. Lizzie grimaced in disgust. Alaric didn't care much. Another monster. He guessed. I nodded. Yeah, a basilisk, but the Michelsons and I took care of it. I paused. Now tell me what happened. Josie went into the Ascendant to find answers by trying to contact Kai, he said grimly. I nodded. The hybrid. Siphoner and vampire, right? I asked. Alaric didn't look surprised and pinched the bridge of his nose. That's right, but his full name is Malachi Parker. I nodded and listened. The twin brother of Gisette, biological mother of the twins and my fiancé. He took a shaky breath and continued. I knew his fiancé died on their wedding day, but I didn't know how. But nothing could have prepared me for the pang of horror I felt when Alaric finished. He is also the one that killed my fiancé on our wedding day, he finished sadly. Lizzie looked heartbroken at the confession and I clenched my fist tightly. Alaric closed his eyes and looked me dead in the eye. And now Josie is in there with a psychopathic murderer that at times makes Klaus Michelson look like an angel.